Shalom. Our Torah portion this week is Yitro. It is in this week's Torah portion that we have the first iteration of the Ten Commandments. Now this Sedra, which is named after Yitro, Jethro in English, who happens to be the non-Jewish father-in-law of Moses. And we find that Moses benefits a great deal from the wisdom of this non-Jewish religious leader who happens to be a Midianite priest. At the beginning of the portion, we find that Yitro tells Moses that what Moses is doing with regard to the judicial system, the very chaotic, disorganized judicial system that our people had when leaving Egypt, wasn't right. Moses apparently was listening to every single case, personally, every single case among the Jewish people. He was sitting from morning until evening. Now, this was wearing him out, and we can assume that he could not possibly adjudicate each of these cases in a timely manner. So what does Jethro do? He says to Moses, set up a judicial system of a series of courts. There would be judges, maybe we might call them the Supreme Court judges, maybe something like that, of a high court in charge of listening to cases involving thousands of people, maybe a district of at least 1,000 people, and then a lower court that would be in charge of listening to cases involving a district of 100 people, and then down to 50, and then down to 10 people, maybe neighborhood magistrates. But something is even more remarkable, in my estimation, happens in this week's Torah portion with regard to Jethro's wisdom. It's more theological. Jethro, this non-Jewish priest of Midian, recognizes God's providence with regard to our people leaving Egypt. Now we can imagine that our people was absolutely in disarray and awestruck, and they weren't thinking about God. But this non-Jewish man brings them to the point where they understand that this is God's intervention. Let's take a look at what it says in the Torah. And Jethro rejoiced over all the kindness that the Eternal had shown Israel when delivering them from the Egyptians. Blessed be the Eternal, Jethro said, who delivered you from the Egyptians and from Pharaoh, and who delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. There is a midrashic tradition that said it took Jethro to turn the people back toward God, or at least toward God. It took a non-Jew to infuse the Jewish people with this sense of God's presence in their history. Throughout the Bible, we find all sorts of non-Jews who had an influence on our religious tradition. In the book of Genesis, we read about a very wise king by the name of Melchizedek, who blessed the God of Abraham. He was a God-fearing man, and he came out to greet Abraham after the war, a war called the War of the Five Kings against the Four Kings. We also see in the book of Genesis, we have actually a whole Sedra named after Noah, another non-Jewish person who walked with God, who was a righteous man in his generation, perhaps the only righteous person in his generation. Later on in the Bible, we read about Job. Job, a non-Jew, who taught us so much with regard to keeping our faith when we are afflicted with suffering. We also read about King Cyrus, a Gentile king of the Persians, who was considered to be an elect of God, someone who served God and was designated as such, as a servant of God. Throughout Jewish history, our ancestors have learned from non-Jews. It is said that the Jews of Alexandria, Egypt, were quite influenced by the Greek philosophers. We see that that was the case with Moses Maimonides in the 12th century. He often quotes Aristotle. It is said that early Kabbalistic thinkers were influenced by Neoplatonic philosophy. Certainly Reformed Judaism was influenced, early Reformed thinkers were influenced by the works, by the ideas of the Protestant Christian philosopher Immanuel Kant. Early Hasidism, it is said, was influenced by some ideas from Christian mysticism that was very common during the 18th century in Eastern Europe. So we find that God speaks not only to the Jewish people. We love our tradition and we maintain our Jewish ways, but it is said that when the Ten Commandments were given, they were given in 70 languages. Sometimes we encounter non-Jews along the way who reinvigorate our own interest in religion. There's a phenomenon that so many rabbis of my generation have observed, and that is in those communities where Christians take their religion seriously, we find that Jews in those communities take their religion seriously, where Christians affiliate in great numbers with their churches, that Jews tend to affiliate in greater numbers in their synagogues. What I take away from this Torah portion is that we, as long as we are steeped in our own tradition and committed to the preservation and the truths of Judaism, that we should be open to truth wherever it may be found. And we should engage in dialogue with people of faith of every religion. Well, I hope that you will read this week's Torah portion and come to your own conclusions. Shabbat Shalom.